Restoring a Bing Clockwork train Part 7, fitting the buffers, painting the buffer beams and repairing the lining. Before I can fit the buffers though, I need to make some nuts. And to make these nuts I'm using a piece of brass hexagon fitted into the 3-jaw chuck of my Boxford lathe. Making nuts using a piece of brass hexagon in a lathe is a very simple job. So while I'm doing this, I'll just tell you that my first article for Engineering in Miniature magazine will be appearing in the magazine very shortly. This series of articles are going to be once again, just like the videos, aimed at the beginner. And the first article of this series contains some very useful information about buying your first lathe. The first article is really an introduction, but there's some useful information in it, as there will be in the rest of the articles. You've just seen me using a centre drill followed by a twist drill, and here I'm using a 0BA tap to thread the hole that I've just drilled in the piece of brass hexagon bar. As far as I could tell, the original thread on the buffer stock, the only one that was fitted to the engine, was an M6 thread. And when I looked in my drawer, which has metric taps and dies in it, I couldn't find an M6 die. So instead I used 0BA, which is very similar to M6. The thread pitches of 0BA and M6 are different, but it doesn't matter because these 0BA nuts fit perfectly onto the 0BA threads that I cut in the end of the buffer stocks. I'm using a small spanner to tighten the nuts onto the buffer stock, and to stop the buffer stock from rotating I'm using a piece of emery cloth and a pair of pliers. I've been using the tender to temporarily store the parts that I removed from the engine, but now it's time to tip them into a plastic box because it's time to fit the buffer stocks to the tender. Having a cursory glance at the paintwork on the tender, it really isn't in very good condition. Look at this. As I've said all along, I don't intend to repaint this model. It is what it is. I think I'll oil the wheels though because they're very dry and very rattly. For some reason, around the top edge of the tender was a really big lump of solder, just there for no reason, so using my Proxxon motor tool, I'm removing it. Time, I think, for a quick health and safety warning. Here you see me using a scalpel blade to scrape away the solder that I can't get to with the rotary tool. When using scalpel blades like this, and also when using rotary tools generally, you need to wear some safety glasses. If you accidentally break one of these scalpel blades, you don't want the broken part to hit you in the eye. This is a tin of Phoenix Precision Paints single pack etch primer. And here is the long list of instructions that was wrapped around the tin. I'm using etch primer so that it firmly sticks to the brass, ready for the top coat. When I showed the buffer assemblies in the last episode, one viewer commented, "Are you not going to use springs?" As is often the case, preempting what is coming next. So just for that particular viewer, here is a collection of springs, and in this collection I found this one, which will be fine for the buffer stock springs. This is a bottle of Loctite 243 and it's thread locker, it's not retainer and it's not hydraulic seal. This stuff is designed to stop things from working loose. I found these 7BA studs in a box of 7BA studs. These are Stuart Models 7BA studs commercially available for their engines, but also ideal for this job. One end goes into the buffer head, and not forgetting to put the spring on first. The entire assembly then goes through the hole in the buffer stock and I'm fitting a nut on the end. And once again I'm using some Loctite 543 to stop it from working loose. Really, these buffers don't need to be sprung, but it's a nice touch to have springs in there. I should really have painted the buffer beam before fitting the buffer heads, but I thought, no, I'll live dangerously. So here's the other pair of buffers fitted to the tender, and now it's time to paint them. There was never any paint on the front of the engine because the front of the engine was completely smashed. So I'm matching the paint by mixing some Humbrol red with some Phoenix Paints buffer beam red. That's a bit too bright and the Humbrol's a bit too dark, so hopefully by mixing them together I should get somewhere near. It's not a perfect match, but by the time I've painted the buffer beam very carefully, painting around the existing transfers on the buffer beam. The MR, by the way, stands for Midland Railway. These transfers are also damaged, but it's not a big problem, it is after all a very old engine. I got some red paint on the drawbar, but I'm not bothered because I'm going to paint that black anyway. Here is a shot of the red paint drying, and I think it looks okay. This engine's never going to be in mint condition. In fact, looking at it, it's a bit of a dog really. Most of the lining on this engine has either been painted over in the past or is damaged. I'm going to attempt to sympathetically repair the lining using one of these. They're incredibly cheap and they're called nail art brushes, but be warned. Before using them, wash them in warm water because the bristles have been coated in something to make them look good. And as you get them out of the packet, the bristles are too stiff. For the lining, I'm using some British Railways Signal Yellow, once again from Precision Paints, and here is a tin of Humbrol Matte Black. By adding this matte black paint to the yellow paint, it makes it a lot darker, and hopefully it will match the colour of the original paint. I find lining really difficult, but this is easy because it needs to look horrible. Nor do I want a solid line, I need a fragmented line. So I dip the brush in the paint and wipe most of it off, and after a while it starts to look okay. I'm only applying this paint to the areas where the paint's entirely missing, mainly at the front and the back and a little bit in the middle. Watching this clip as I record the voiceover, I realise that it is easier to line using a brush than it is with a lining pen. I'm definitely going to practice this and master it in the end, but I'm nowhere near yet. Here I'm practising on the lid of my metric drill set. It's not so good. I think I'll practice on my finger instead. Here I'm actually painting a small picture of Stonehenge. These are nail art brushes after all. And now, with my index fingernail looking slightly more attractive, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching and I hope you found it useful.